So we're on, right?
I did.
Okay, welcome everyone to the special meeting of April 28th. Madam City Clerk, can you call the roll call, please?
Councilmember Chow.
Here.
Councilmember Sinks. Councilmember Willie.
Here.
Vice Mayor Paul.
Here.
Mayor Sharp.
Here. Okay, Madam City Clerk, do we have anybody for oral communications?
I don't see any. Yes, Peggy Griffin is waiting to speak.
Okay.
I'll allow her.
Yeah, I don't know why I can't. Do I not have control here or what?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, well, yeah, go ahead, Peggy.
Okay. Good evening, council members, staff. I want to speak to the Regnart Creek Trail for two things. One is I don't understand why it's being worked on at all right now when it's not an essential project. And the other part is there's a portion, I've been trying to stay out of the Regnart Creek Trail, but there's a section that I noticed between Torrey and the creek that is not necessary. It's proposed to be, now the plan is to extend the sidewalk, which could damage the tree roots. And it really adds more traffic and unsafe conditions for pedestrians and also for the intersection. So that's all I wanted to say is I just don't understand why it's being worked on now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peggy.
And I have one email, Mr. Mayor,
Okay, go ahead.
from VG. Dear council members, I would like to thank the city manager and staff in bringing the COVID-19 fiscal update. I'm sorry, this is actually for number one.
Oh, okay, that's fine. So that's all for,
Yes.
oh,
Now Lisa Warren is raising her hand. I'll allow her to talk.
okay, welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. It was raised before, but it was after you looked, sorry. So just, actually, I want to echo some concerns about the Regnart Creek Trail with Peggy, but I want to add that there was some confusion in my mind at the ERC meeting when this was discussed about the portion of the trail that would go along the library field and whether it would, it was said at ERC that it would not affect the trees, it would not be going through the trees. I remembered it as being a trail that would actually be paved, the roots between the row of trees. And I'm looking at a document from May of 2019 that shows that being the case. So if it's changed since then, I don't know what the change is. But more importantly, I'm wondering, with the whole fiscal thing, a couple things. In the coffee talk last week, it came up that people were really enjoying the online live fitness classes that were offered at Quinlan, and that people would like that to continue. And I echo that. And city manager mentioned she may look into that being feasible. And I would say that a lot of people would be willing to pay for that. So I don't think it would be a cost negative to the city to do that. I think you just get more people to take the classes, just not all physically there, and you'd actually have more income. So please, please do look into that. And I would like to know if there's a way to appropriately request that residents of Cupertino shop Cupertino. Now, again, we have very little essential retail left in our city, but what we do have is a Safeway on Homestead and a CVS on Deanza. And, people that live closer to other Safeways or other CVSs may be used to going to those, but I would like to know if we can encourage people to help with our tax base, if they're residents of Cupertino, to frequent the essential retail that they do need within the boundaries of Cupertino. It's similar, I would say, to, for instance, a school district having a fundraiser and it being promoted go to these restaurants on this night and you're going to get a percentage. Or even, I think it was Chamber of Commerce that maybe did the dined Cupertino or something. I may be making that up, but there's something in my head that remembers something like that. Just encouraging people to do that so that the dollars they are spending, the taxes are going to their own city. And I think that's it for now.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Anybody else, Kirsten?
That appears to be it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so we are on to ordinances and action items. So the number one is COVID-19 fiscal impacts update. Can we have the staff report?
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. I'm going to try to get my PowerPoint up on the screen. This is Christina Alfaro, Director of Administrative Services. All right. I want to make sure everybody can see the presentation up on my screen or up on your screen.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So good evening, council members. Good evening, Mayor, council members. I've already introduced myself. This evening, I'll be presenting to you fiscal year 2019-20 update and also the fiscal year 2020-2021 preview. And these updates are really related to the impacts COVID-19 has had on the city's budget. On the agenda this evening, we'll go over again where we are for the current fiscal year, give you a brief preview of the upcoming fiscal year as we're scheduled to be before you on May 19th to have the proposed budget study session in which we'll go more in depth into fiscal year 2021 along with a 10-year forecast. We're going to go over the budget cycle, which just outlines when we're normally in front of council going over changes to the budget, and then we'll go over the budget calendar that covers some important upcoming dates. So we'll jump right into fiscal year 2019-20 update. Some important considerations before we jump into the numbers are the impacts related to COVID-19 are really that we've had some sharp revenue drops in this last quarter, primarily in transient occupancy tax and charges for services. I think the jury is still out there on whether this has caused a recession or not. In terms of our modeling for the next at least couple fiscal years, we're assuming a 2-year recession. But the big thing really around COVID-19 is the uncertainty. When will we open back up? Will the economy just pick up and go? Will it be kind of a V-shaped recession, or will there be other impacts that linger longer into our forecast? The other thing that's important to note about a COVID-19 impact is economies are generally cyclical, but we haven't had to deal with a pandemic and what a recovery looks like after that. So everybody is learning as we go. There's a ton of new information every day. And as we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation, that means that more than likely, as I'm before you this evening, there may be other times off of our regular budget cycle that we may be before council talking about any significant changes to our revenue or expenditure estimates. For purposes of this evening, hold on, it says it started my video. I'm gonna hit that button, now you can see me. This evening's presentation will focus primarily on the general fund. However, the staff report that was provided for this item in the agenda does cover some of our other funds, particularly our transportation funds and our enterprise funds. But again, for this evening, we'll be focused on the general fund, and that's because that's where council has the most discretion. Some other additional considerations is these are our best estimates given the information we have at the time. These are not where we are actually going to end the year. This is our best guess. Again, should there be any large deviations from our estimates, we'd be before council letting you know what had occurred, what changed that resulted in our estimates changing. There's currently a soft hiring freeze, and what that means is the city manager, it means currently is no position in the city can be even recruited for. You can't even start that process without getting prior approval from the city manager. In addition, we've asked departments to look at cost in their special project category, which are generally revenue pass-through projects, but other special one-time projects, and see if they could make any reductions in this category. And you'll see as we go through the presentation, the reason why we focused in specifically on this category is we were already anticipating having savings in a lot of our other expenditure categories. Lastly, and not related to the general fund, is that all capital improvement projects that have already been funded in the current and prior fiscal years remain funded. This current year or next year does not recommend any defunding of already funded capital projects. With that, we'll jump right into the presentation. So this table, I'm going to try to walk you through the mechanics of it first, and then we'll go through where we thought we were going to end the year before COVID, the COVID impacts, and then what the budget looks like after we've mitigated some of those COVID impacts. And so we'll start here with where we thought we were going to end the year prior to COVID. And the way this formula works is we're going to start with our beginning unassigned fund balance, which is a portion of the city's savings account. And this portion of our savings account is unassigned, which means it hasn't been earmarked for any specific purpose. It's free and clear. It's generally the excess revenue that we transfer over to the capital reserve at mid-year. But we began the year at $28 million in this unassigned fund balance. Again, it doesn't include any of our earmarked items like the 115 trust or the uncertainty reserve. This is just unassigned fund balance. That was at 28 million. So to that 28 million, we go in and we add our revenues. We'll subtract our expenditures out. That will get us our net impact to fund balance. So revenues minus expenditures gets us this impact to fund balance. We then take that difference and subtract it from our $28 million that we started with, and that will get us where we think we're going to end the year in terms of unassigned fund balance in the general fund. So let's see what we thought was going to happen prior to COVID. We anticipated revenues coming in at 93.4 million, expenditures of 108.3 million, resulting in a use of fund balance of 14.9 million and an estimated year-end fund balance of 13.1 million. Then we had COVID-19, the pandemic strike, and that resulted in some sharp decreases to our revenue estimates of $11.3 million. And we're going to go into a little detail of those in a couple of slides down. It didn't have an impact to our revenue right away. So our revenue number estimate stayed about the same, which resulted in an estimated impact of fund balance of 26.2 million, which meant we would be spending down the bulk of our estimated year-end fund balance, leaving only $1.8 million. So what staff did is we kind of started to strategize about how we could mitigate these impacts. And what we were able to do is bring revenues up 90 to 92.1 million, resulting only in a decrease of 1.3 million from our original estimates. This is largely related to a transfer in from the capital reserve, again, which we'll go into a little more detail in just a couple of slides. And then we went in and tried to further reduce where we thought we were going to end the year for our expenditures and brought that number to 102.6 million. The result was an impact to fund balance of 10.5 million, which meant we anticipated ending the year now with unassigned fund balance of 17.5 million. With that, we're going to show this the same story here, but we're going to show it in a graphical format for those of you that may be a little more visual. So this is exactly from the slide before. These are the same numbers. So we're looking at our year-end projection. We're going to start with the gray bar, which is our revenue. It was at 93.4 million. That got reduced to 82.1 million due to COVID. And then that got brought back up to 92.1 million once we factor in the transfer in from the capital reserve. Our expenditures were 108.3. They stayed at 108.3, but then staff went in and tried to look for further reductions, bringing that number down to 102.6. And the ending result of that is we thought we were going to have a year-end ending unassigned fund balance of 13.1. COVID brought that down to 1.8. The mitigating impacts brought that up to 17.5 million. So with that, that's kind of a summary slide. I'm going to go into a little more detail. And so when we look at general fund estimates, we're going to build out this chart just as a way to kind of focus you on the numbers I want you to look at. So as you remember, we started the year-end estimates at 93.4 million. And then as a result of COVID, we saw a reduction in transient occupancy tax of 3.7 million. Charges for services went down 4 million. Miscellaneous revenue down 2.5 million. Fines and forfeitures and other financing sources were down about $1 million. What's important to note about this revenue chart is the charges for services and the miscellaneous revenue. A large portion of this decrease is really being driven by decreases in special projects. So a lot of the projects in special projects have pass-through revenues that impact our charges for services and our miscellaneous revenue. So when you took all of these impacts related to COVID, what we saw is a reduction in revenue of $11.3 million. What staff will be recommending as part of the third quarter financial report on May 19th is that we take $10 million from the capital reserve and bring it back into the general fund. As you may recall, as part of mid-year, we transferred $20 million of unassigned fund balance to the capital reserve. And now we're saying we should bring half of that back, 10 million back. Bringing back those dollars will still leave $6 million in the capital reserve. It leaves all of the existing projects funded. What bringing these dollars back will do is have an impact on potential future projects that could be funded. And again, that is a decision we'll bring before council on May 19th. If that is approved, we'd be looking at our estimated year-end revenues once mitigated at $92.1 million, again, which is only a $1.3 million lower than we anticipated prior to COVID. We're going to take the same format and we're going to apply it to expenditures for the general fund. So it's important, I talked about it a little bit earlier, but we do, as we start looking at the end of the year, we start making estimates on where we think we're going to end based on historical budget trends. And when we did that, what we estimated was that we were going to have salary and benefit savings of about $1.42 million. This is really related to vacancy and attrition savings. So when a position is vacated, it's generally about a 3 to 4 month lag to fill that position. And that's really what most of this salary and benefit savings is made up of. Materials are anticipated to be down about $2.1 million. Contracts about $1.8 million. Contingencies down $1 million. And other financing uses down about $600,000 or so. And again, this is all based on historical trend analysis, historical budget savings. We go in and we estimate where we think we're going to end the year. And when we look at the $108.3 million number that we talked about, our year-end expenditure projection prior to COVID, that already included all of these savings. They are already built into the $108.3 million number. But we wanted just to call those out so you understand when we were focusing on the special project item and some of the furlough items, is that we had already accounted for the savings that you see before you. So then we take that 108.3 number and we look for additional reductions in special projects. And the bulk of this, almost half, actually a little over half, is related to Apple Campus 2 as they close out special projects related to some of the ancillary buildings as part of the Apple Campus. Another large portion of it is special projects really facility related and public works, and then a lot of other really smaller projects that make up the difference. In addition to that, we have additional salary and benefit savings related to the furlough of part-time staff, and we anticipate that number coming in at about $180,000 or $0.18 million, which resulted in our new year-end estimated expenditures post-COVID-19 of $102.6 million. I'm going to stop here for a moment. The next slide I'm going to go on to covers what has happened with our labor costs related to COVID-19 and the strategies that have been put in place since the original shelter in place. But I thought it's a good stopping point to see if anybody has any questions.
Okay, I guess, Kirsten, you're controlling this because I guess I'm not a host on this meeting. So do you see any hands raised? I have two questions.
I have, well, I know Peggy Griffin would like to share a slide, and then I have an email to read from BG.
All right, but we're not done with the presentation yet.
Okay, I thought you were requesting that, sorry.
So, no, I'm just wondering. Yeah, so I have two questions. One, what's the reasoning of taking money from capital reserves instead of the rainy day fund?
As we go for, sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
If it's okay, I'll kind of answer one question at a time.
Okay.
Really, as part of our strategy, what we're looking to do is build several different layers and buffers in case any of our estimates fall short or our projections change. So as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, it's kind of unprecedented. What does a recession look like, or what does an economy look like? after a pandemic. And so everybody's kind of taking their best guess for what that's going to look like. If we are wrong and we spend down that unassigned reserve first and we go straight to the economic uncertainty reserve, that just gives us less of a buffer to kind of deal with any changes to our projections.
Okay, and the second question is, we want to be sure that we don't jeopardize any federal money that we might be eligible for. I don't know if they say, oh, look, this city's in great shape because they took all this money from somewhere else and now their budget is, back in balance. I mean, do we have any idea what kind of federal money may be coming to cities?
We don't know that yet. Last I heard, they were trying to get something through Congress that would provide some kind of relief to government agencies, but I haven't seen what that looks like yet. I will tell you, as part of the FEMA process and asking for public assistance, there aren't any areas where they ask about kind of ability to pay. It's more of what was the financial impact of having to deal with the disaster.
Okay, and I see several other people with their hands raised, so let's start from the top. Rod, go ahead.
Thank you very much. In the staff report, we were talking about this during my staff briefing earlier today. I noted that, a lot of the monies that we have, or a lot of the revenues that we're looking at for this fiscal year will look much different next fiscal year. And you had talked a bit about a 6-month lag in things like sales tax revenue. Could you talk a little bit more about what expected impacts we're going to see in revenues should this situation continue through the end of this calendar year? What we'd be talking about in terms of revenue shortfalls in sales tax and other categories.
Yeah, so what we're looking at is, you're spot on. Sales tax is received 6 months in arrears, which means there's a 6-month lag time. So all of the loss in sales tax as part of March and the last quarter of the fiscal year will not hit the city until potentially October and January into the next fiscal year. Our hotels currently were forecasting that they would have a slow startup next year, but then they would eventually kind of get back to where they had been previously. But we're still estimating about a 25% loss. So if there's a second wave of COVID, if there's additional impacts that would have to sales tax, if we're already anticipating potential small but impacts to property tax related to unsecured, which is really more related to when businesses buy like big machines, computers, that type of stuff, that is unsecured and they get taxed on that from the property side. We don't anticipate big losses in property tax aside from, again, some minor things related to unsecured. That may happen, but it probably wouldn't happen next fiscal year, but the fiscal year after. It's important to note that Cupertino, during the Great Recession, when many, many agencies had a drop in property tax value where their values went they had negative growth, Cupertino maintained and just had stagnant growth. So they just kind of flattened out, but they never went negative, which is the reason we're not really anticipating a huge drop off to property values there. Again, sales tax is 6 months in arrears, and we are anticipating for next year close to a $5 million reduction in sales tax. If it were to last longer, so go into the end of December, those cuts would be deeper that we'd be looking at for sales tax. So the $5 million assumes one quarter and 1 month of bad sales tax growth. If we were to have an additional one, that could go up to about another $5 million, so a $10 million loss in sales tax. TOT is currently being reduced by 25%, but if this goes on longer and there's another quarter, so we have 2 quarters of a really slow start, that could be up to 50% loss in our TOT revenue.
What? Is anybody staying at our hotels right now?
We think we're at about a 10% occupancy rate, as we've been kind of calling around to the hotels to see.
So why wouldn't the revenue fall off by 90%?
Because we did assume the revenue would fall off for 90%, but only for the first 3 months of the year. So not assuming it for the 6 months of the year.
Okay, so the way to think about it probably is that the run rate with a 10% occupancy reduces our revenues by how much per month or how much per quarter?
Well, I don't have that number off the top of my head. I don't know if Zach Quaritch, our finance manager, is on the line. He may have that at his fingertips. Zach, are you on by any chance?
I am on. And for transient occupancy tax, so far year to date, we've brought in approximately $850,000 per month. Now it is, when we look at it on how we've been affected thus far, as Christina mentioned, we've been, discussing with HDL our, there we go. Thank you. HDL, our TOT tax manager consultant. And while there are approximately 10% occupancy rates, in terms of the revenues and the cash that have come in to Cupertino thus far, it is 1 month in arrears. So we are anticipating, we are impatiently anticipating to see what the impacts during the month of March look like. As of right now, we know that during the month of February, we brought in $750,000. So we're seeing that there may be some slight impacts leading up to the shelter-in-place orders, and we would anticipate, again, as Christina mentioned, that 90% loss for the last 3 to 4 months of the fiscal year.
Yeah, I think what would be really helpful to me as we can continue the conversations are, there are a lot of assumptions behind these numbers shown on an annual basis or quarterly basis or whatever. And the thing we all don't know is how long we're going to be doing this, right? But if you had, if you had something that showed for these major revenue items what our shortfall would be expected to be on a per month basis, right? What's the run rate, in other words, of the difference between the normal operating mode and the and this special time? That would at least help me get my head around this rather than having to ask you for every category, right? How many months did you assume and at what factor and so forth? So I'll leave it there, but obviously just depending on how long this goes on, we will have what we're seeing through the end of this fiscal year is only the beginning here. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Oh, one other thing, Zach. The room rate is probably going to be a lot lower even when we reopen. It probably is not going to shoot back up to like $600 a night. And since
that's really a good
right?
observation.
Yeah,
exactly right. It's not the occupancy; it's what they can.
Right, exactly. Anyway, next, Darcy, you have your hand raised, so I'll unmute you and lower your hand. Go.
Great, thanks. Can you go back to the slide where you list out the various sources of where we're going to be losing funds on a projected basis? So, yeah, keep going back. Along with the numbers of dollars, maybe oh, there we go. So it looks like charges for services is 4 million, miscellaneous revenue is 2.5. And you had mentioned, Christina, that most of these dollars are going to be passed through. And so let me just kind of frame where I'd like to kind of go with this sort of line of questions. And the overarching idea is if these are pass-through dollars, why would we go into our capital reserve in order to help defray those pass-through dollars? Now I'm just trying to think about what the net effect upon our activities is for this money. So it's about 6.5 million total. And if it is passed through, can you help us understand what it would normally go through? So would it be going through our employee pool? And for instance, the planning department, if they were doing particular checks on plans for a project, for instance. So just help us understand the nature of these pass-through dollars.
I will do my best here. So where we would normally see it on the expenditure side, as we talked about, it's going to be in that special project category. That's where we budget the expense related to these. And for these pass-through dollars, what we budget is we anticipate that 100% of that expense is going to be covered through the pass-through revenue, so a one-for-one. So right now, if we're looking at $3 million worth of reductions related to Apple Campus 2 special projects, we'd anticipate a $3 million reduction in charges for services, and then we'd anticipate an additional $450,000 reduction in miscellaneous revenue, and that's that additional 15% admin, so 15% of the $3 million. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So let me go to the next part of this question, which is to say, if we have 3 million plus some in fees that we would ordinarily be charging for a major project or even multiple projects, those services aren't being performed. And so are we essentially being asked to go into the capital reserve and take that money out in order to compensate people that would ordinarily be anticipated to perform those services, but are not actually performing those services? And so here's my concern, and just let me just kind of footnote that. My concern is if this starts up again, a particular project, and let's say, for the sake of the example, we do have a $3 million pass-through of one project. If we're paying for the labor that's not being done right now from our capital reserve, and then that project starts back up again, and then it becomes another pass-through, isn't it the case basically that we're paying once for this work, and then the pass-through entity applicant is also paying for the work? Is that an accurate way of looking at it?
No, let me see if I can explain this a little better. So when we talk about pass-through, it's really done through contracts. So what generally happens is there's services that need to be provided for a project. And there's some kind of accelerator or some reason why staff is not able to perform those tasks. And so what happens is we go out and we contract with a third party to complete those tasks. Before we go out and contract, the person wanting to do the project provides the city a deposit that's supposed to cover all of these costs, plus a 15% administrative fee to city staff for administering the contract. So what happens is when we pull out those charges, reduce the special projects, the expenditure side, it's because the expenses are not passing through. They're not actually happening. And if the expenses don't occur, then we are not allowed to draw down revenue associated with those. So charges for services, we're not allowed to draw those down. And in addition, because we're not administering this transfer of funds, reducing the deposit liability, right, through this expense, then we also don't get our 15% admin fee. So the reality is, if the work doesn't happen, everything kind of stays flat. But what we need to do as account, if we're saying the expense isn't going to occur, we have to go in and reduce the revenue side of the equation to make sure that our numbers all net out.
Right. Okay. So that's good information. I thank you for it. And I would just say that, and by way of my last question, if that's the case, then the city is essentially out 15% in this example of the $3 million or $450,000, if I'm doing the math correctly. And so why, if we're projecting to lose $11 million of revenue in this fiscal year, are we being asked to transfer the $10 million in capital reserve if our anticipated shortfall is really, at least for this particular subcategory of losses, in actuality much less than what's being represented here?
So the reason we're asking to transfer out the 10 million, it's really part of a longer term balancing strategy. And when we talk about, again, the unexpectedness and the uncertainty regarding this potential COVID recession, and should it go longer than we're anticipating, the shelter in place going longer, those impacts would result in us having to take larger cuts to our expenditures. By bringing the dollars back over to the general fund and not allocating them to any specific capital project, that buys us some time in order to not have to make such deep cuts so fast if we're wrong. If we're right or we're right to the better, that doesn't stop the city from then transferring those funds back out. The funds are not being used. As you can see, we go from that 28 million, we're at 17 and a half. And when we get to our anticipated proposed budget, you'll see that that number, that 17 and a half million, only drops down slightly further. So it's more of we're trying to hold on to it in the general fund. Should any of our estimates or projections fall short, then we have those dollars to pull from. But the reality is over the long run, that doesn't mean those dollars will stay in the general fund. That's going to depend on what happens with the economy and what that looks like against our projections and our assumptions.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Leon,
Hello, hi. Let me get my notes. So, I'm trying to compare between the slides and the staff report. The staff report, I see that under expenditures, there is $23 million budgeted for contract service. And now there is no reduction at all for that contract services.
That's
So
correct.
are we still paying all the contractors even though we don't have services for them to perform?
So we anticipate, I'm going to move the slide forward here, but I'm going to try to do it without the animation. So bear with me for a second.
I don't like that in your presentation, so I'm confused.
Yeah, so right here on this slide, when we looked at where we thought we were going to end the year, we anticipate we're going to have a savings in contracts of $1.8 million. And again, I want to call out that these are our best estimates given the information at this time, and we anticipate that information is going to be changing pretty rapidly. But right now, we estimate having a savings of about $1.8 million in contracts.
So still, that's a lot of contracts that we are still paying. So can we get some idea what kind of contracts we have?
Yes. So
are there any way we might negotiate and I don't know how is the payment structured? Is it by hour? Is it by per month? Is there a way we can get some discount for this month that they cannot provide services?
Yeah. So what I can tell you is the bulk of contract services is really made up by two main contracts. The first being our law enforcement contract, which may have a savings at the year end when we true up related to their costs. We just don't know what that looks like now because we don't know what it looks like through the end of the year. So we generally assume that they're going to fully spend those dollars. So there may be potential savings there. The second largest contract is related to our city attorney's office. And as I understand it, we are making strides in trying to do some cost containment on that project as well. The other contracts are really kind of some small contracts, various ones based on either an hour or services provided or what's it called, like milestones, deliverables, things like that. But that's something I definitely that I think staff has been trying to work with. We just don't necessarily have a quantifiable number for what that might look like through year end. So right now we do anticipate that that number will be about 1.8 million though.
Okay. And so the spatial project, so the other reduction is the spatial project, 5.5 million. That's really pass-through dollars, right?
The bulk of it is related, about $3 million or so is related to pass-through dollars.
Okay. So then my question would be, we have allocated a budget for a full staff to provide full service for Cupertino residents. But a lot of those services cannot be performed because of the shelter-in-place order. And however, we are still incurring the exact same amount of expenses. And the same service, some of the project probably will be delayed till after the closure, after we open up. But the same expense we still need to pay for the same amount of service and expenses that we are paying now but are not getting service. So what's the impact on the services? And what's the financial impact on our loss?
So what I I will tell you is it's going to differ by department. A lot of city staff is teleworking and providing those same services that they would have provided in person. For example, IT, administrative services, we're still required to process payroll, do payroll changes, do accounts payable. IT has been tremendous in trying to assist staff with Zoom room meetings as we're doing now. And so city manager's office is also, there is quite a bit of staff, about more than half, that is teleworking on pretty much a full-time, or I should say probably more than full-time basis. So, and even some services that you might not anticipate that we could still provide, specifically in our community development department. IT has partnered with that department to make sure we're still able to do, I think, like inspections virtually. So they're just, we have a really great group of staff that's really committed to try to continue to provide services. So that there are certain departments that are more heavily impacted by the shelter in place. And those are really related to our maintenance workers in public works and our parks and recreation staff, whose main job really is to put on different programs and events for our community. And so we're seeing larger impacts happening there. And what we're really trying to do is kind of twofold, is we're trying as much as we can to keep our labor force intact for as long as possible, is that we don't know as government workers when we may be called to be disaster service workers. If there's something that were to happen on top of the pandemic and we needed to have staff come in to assist, they need to be ready and available. If we did not have that staff ready and available, we may not be able to respond to an emergency as we're required to as a government agency. So that's kind of another big point. The other thing is we don't know, well, now we know not until at least May 30th that we're going to be called back to work. We also don't know what that looks like when we return. And so the reality is we have seen reduction in some of these items really related to staff, maybe some of the contracts, some of the other financing sources, some of those projects that can't come through. But again, as a government agency, we need to be prepared with staff to come in and perform duties as we need them to. And that means having to keep some staff on our payroll just so we're prepared to do so and we're set up in the best capacity to be able to respond to those emergencies. So we haven't necessarily quantified X amount of staff does this amount of work and that staff's not working on that work. So there's a loss. The other thing is, we're a staff that carries a pretty heavy workload across most departments. And so most of our departments, aside from our regular day-to-day work, have a long list of things we would really like to get done when we have the time. And generally we haven't had the time. And a lot of that is getting departments to kind of focus on those internal efficiencies right now, going in and doing some of those items that we wouldn't have normally had time to do, which is another reason why, even if they're not specifically working on what they would have normally done, we still see it as a benefit to the city that we're able to potentially gain some efficiencies and get some other tasks off our to-do list that we wouldn't have normally had time to do. And I know that's not a very good answer. I'm not giving you a numbers answer, but that's kind of in general when we're looking at staffing and we're looking at.
I believe that, I don't know why you don't have the numbers, because I read the Palo Alto staff report. They have the exact number of staff that's on paid leave and the exact number of hours that they are being paid for and the exact dollar amount each pay period, the cost it is that we are paying. I support that, fully support that. We want to keep our staff on staff. But however, when we are doing fiscal impact analysis as a result of COVID-19, we need to understand how much is that impact on us, because this is not what our budget is made for. We made our budget to provide services. We didn't make budget to pay for disaster workers, to provide all this and that. And I believe the federal government required the city to keep all the hours, all the hours spent on providing disaster services. So there should be, you should have that number.
So you are correct. We are required, if we're going to be asking for federal assistance, to talk about those dollars spent responding to the disaster as a disaster service worker. We actually do keep the numbers, and if there aren't any other questions, the next slide will actually show the impact of the paid administrative leave. I'm sorry, the way I understood your question was related to loss of revenues and staffing at the same time, kind of that net impact of people not providing services and the loss of revenue. We don't have a quantifiable number for that, but we do definitely have a number when it comes to hours and costs related to paid administrative leave. And that will cover that in the next coming slide.
All right, before we go to that slide, which may answer the question, I don't, the council person, Willie, your hand is not raised, but I didn't know if you had any comments.
As like last week, I don't see the raise hand feature again.
Okay, whatever, okay.
If you could go back to the slide number 6, it's a fairly simple question, but I think it would help. Yeah, correct. Just trying to be sure I keep things in perspective, and hopefully any residents that are watching. So this is year-end projections, and the year-end is in the end of June. So these adjustments, these decreases, these losses are truly just January to June, correct?
Yes, so these numbers take into account the impacts related to COVID. So any revenue impacts or expenditure impacts we would have seen kind of starting from March when we started to see the kind of pandemic start through the end of June.
Yeah, I'm just kind of rounding it off to a half year, January. But if we're saying that, you know, we're going to wind up with the impact of fund balance, $10 million for say 4 months, then we're essentially saying that it's about $2.5 million a month that we're down revenue versus expenses. And are you essentially saying that each of those 4 months are treated equally, or did it ramp up? Because then when we go and we talk 2020, 2021, I'm going to ask the similar question, you know, how are you going to treat those on a month by month basis? The year end, I think that's great. You gave us the year end numbers, but trying to understand, you know, a year end number when all this impact has been in, you know, just a 4 month time span, it kind of covers up how significant it's been for the 4 months that were, you know, $2.5 million per month. And then next year, it's going to be more dramatic, because if it starts, you know, where we leave off this year and conceivably lasts for the entire year, I just, you know, I'm kind of trying to keep it simple and get an idea of, you know, how dramatic it's going to be at the end of next year. It's not going to be a minus 10.5 million, because that's only for 4 months. But next year, we're talking, you know, conceivably a much bigger number. So I'll leave that for the other half of the presentation. But that's kind of where I'm going, is if we had at least an understanding of, you know, January, no impact to our revenue and expenses, February, no impact, then March, okay, March, April, May, June, $2.5 million per month. Then I could say, okay, now I really understand what's going on. Where, you know, by the end of year projection, I kind of lose the understanding of what really happened. It's only for 4 months, and yet this is the impact.
Correct. So yes, COVID has caused some very quick and steep impacts to our revenue. And I think I've heard both Councilmember Willie from you and Councilmember Singh that having that per month basis will really assist in kind of trying to figure out, okay, well, if we go through shelter in place, we assume July, right? There's a ramp up. What does that impact look like? If that shelter in place or there's a second COVID, you know, what would be kind of a monthly impact? And so we'll definitely figure out a way to work that into the proposed budget hearing that will happen on May 19th. So you can kind of get that per month impact of revenue to expenditures.
Great, appreciate that. Thank you, very good so far.
All right, if that's it, I'll move on to the next slide. I'm just looking for the mayor to give me the.
Right, yeah, go ahead, and then we'll take the public comment after you finish.
Okay, so as we mentioned, we are going to be presenting some labor cost impacts related to our paid administrative leave. I will be lifting the curtain on the last 4 bars here, but I wanted to just take a quick moment to get you acquainted with the table that's in front of you. These are really going to be broken up here in specific timeframes that are related to either the shelter-in-place order or related to changes in what the city was offering in terms of paid administrative leave. This first column is the only one that's going to have actual costs in it. The others are going to be estimated based on the most current payroll, which covers 410 to 424. That'll be the next table that's revealed here. But that payroll has not been processed and finalized yet. So those numbers are still estimates. And so will the numbers that we'll cover after that. But let's start talking about our actual. So in this first column, this covers 317 to 410, which is right about, I think the first shelter in place order was originally supposed to go through April 7th, I believe. And so we extended ours a little further because as we get information about the extensions, we then have to go make a plan to figure out what that's going to look like. So because we didn't announce our plans until a little later, we wanted to give a little leeway to employees to understand what was changing and how they needed, what were the impacts that were going to be to them. So the first, right over to your left under employee type, we call out if this is a full-time benefited employee or this is a part-time employee. This calls out the number of employees using the paid administrative leave, the number of part-time employees using the paid administrative leave, and then it totals it by all employee categories here at the bottom. We currently have had about 88 employees using admin leave during between March 17th and April 10th. We have 184 full-time employees. So just to give you a sense of how many were using the paid admin leave of the full-time employees. They utilize a little over 9,000 hours in paid administrative leave with costs of approximately almost $341,000. For part-time employees, we had 77 of them utilizing paid administrative leave with a little over 300 hours used and costs of about $67,000. So what's important to note here, and I should have started with this, is during this time frame, the city offered up to 80 hours of paid administrative leave in a pay period. That breaks out to about 40 hours per week. And then for the part-time staff, they were offered paid administrative leave to what would have been their normal schedule. So they would have normally been scheduled to work. They were put on paid administrative leave for those hours. And that is kind of the gist of what we did the first shelter in place. Then what happened is shelter in place got extended. Along with that, we had the federal government come in effective April 1 and offer paid leave, still employer paid leave, but we had things like the Family First Coronavirus Act, the FFCRA, and the Emergency Paid Sick Leave, which provided for 80 hours of paid sick leave, again, still employer paid, but related to any kind of shelter in place order or should you become sick with COVID. So we had these additional leaves that became available through these acts. In addition to that, we were trying to be cognizant of potential fiscal impacts to the city. And we said we need to reduce this administrative leave down to 20 hours. And that 20 hours was not just a number out of thin air. There were some very good reasons behind the 20 hours. The first, the most important really being, we need to maintain a healthy workforce that's going to be able to come back to work when we need them to come to work. We also want employees to feel confident that they can go visit their doctor and they have those services available to them. And with the 20 hours per week or 40 hour per pay period that happened during this 4/11 to 5/1 time frame, that kept intact. So even if they worked no other hours and all they had were the 20 hours of administrative leave, that meant the city would continue to pay our portion of their health care coverage. And that was a very big point for the city in picking that 20-hour number. In addition, we felt more comfortable reducing those hours because there were these additional leaves through these federal acts that now required us to have at least a portion of paid leave to our employees. And so just kind of a little bit of the thought process behind why did we go from 40 to 20. And then I'll give you the estimated cost. So this assumes we would have 20 hours of paid administrative leave, up to 20 hours of paid administrative leave per week from April 11th through May 1st. Again, the costs break out similarly. You'll see We actually went from 88 employees to 78 employees utilizing this. The hours, of course, were reduced actually by more than half to 3,412. And then we saw our costs come down more than half to about 129,000. You'll see the part-time employees. Again, this paid administrative leave was no longer available to part-time employees. That's part of the 0.18 million in furlough savings that we talked about in a previous table. And so we anticipated that would be about $129,000 or so. And this covers about a 1.5 pay periods. So this value of 129 covers about 1.5 pay periods. So now, as we know, the shelter in place has been extended through May 30th. If we were to look at those numbers, assuming we would stay, and I want to make sure this is a big caveat, no decision has been made regarding paid administrative leave past 5/1, but supposing we were to extend that paid administrative leave of the 20 hours per week, and assuming that the employees who used it for this first pay period would be the same ones that continue to use it at the same rate, then we would anticipate costs to extend the paid administrative leave to be about $172,000 for pay period May 2nd through May 30th. Now, if the shelter in place were to get extended further, let's say through the end of the fiscal year, we would anticipate that would be about another 5,000 or so hours and an additional cost of about 198,000. And so if we were to kind of continue on this path with our actuals and extending the paid administrative leave for 20 hours, we'd be looking at potential costs of about $908,000 for the paid administrative leave. And I want to do a big point here about how we budget our staffing in our budget. When we budget for a position, we assume every position that's allocated in the city, every full-time position allocated in the city will work 2080 hours, 2088 on a leap year, but generally 2080 hours. And we don't make any assumptions about if that's regular work hours, if that's leave, if that's some other kind of like FMLA or protected leave or paid leave through SDI. We just assume they're going to 2080 hours is what's put in for every position. And so when we look at these, we don't anticipate this to have a budget impact, in that we're not going to come back and say we need more dollars because salary and benefits went over because of paid administrative leave. All of this has been factored in terms of a 2080 hour work year for an employee. So I just wanted to make sure we made that caveat and had a discussion about how full-time staffing is budgeted in the city. But this is actually my last slide on fiscal year 1920, and then we'll go into a fiscal year 2021 preview. So I wanted to kind of stop on this chart, as I know there were some comments related to being able to show this information.
Oh, so I have just one comment. Tomorrow we will have details on the shelter-in-place extension, and it's likely to not be exactly the same as the one that we're under now. There could be some loosening up of some activities that can be done safely. So I think it's the case that some of these positions that are now on the administrative leave could actually start working based on what changes are made by the county tomorrow. So this, we could go to the end of the year, but it's probably not going to be exactly the same. It would be some gradual loosening up of what can be done safely.
Can I add a little something?
Sure.
So the other thing is, since the current health order has been extended from the 3rd to the 30th, we are taking a look at how to bring back all of public works, either under this county order that might be loosening up some things, but also because we have essential government services and essential government infrastructure that needs to be maintained. It's gotten past its deferred maintenance time. So we're making plans to make sure that we can, if we're able to, bring public works back starting Monday, May 4th. Now, if that's the case, then the majority of the folks sitting on paid administrative leave under the full-time category that are being paid for through May 1st would come off of administrative leave and go back to work. Sorry.
Okay, with that, I'll move on in the
Go ahead,
presentation.
Leon. That was muted. Okay.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate what the city manager just said. Thank you.
Okay, great. Leon, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for bringing forward this detailed cost analysis. So this is the fiscal impact on the city. Please include that as impact. This is not something we have budgeted for. We have budgeted for all these employees to perform their normal responsibilities. Some of them might be providing fee for service for fee, and those fees are not coming forward right now. And then I do want to support them. However, I still am concerned that this budget modification was not brought in front of the council for approval, because this was not what the council budgeted the 2019-80 budget for. I have actually consulted with longtime former city manager, city council member, other city council member from other cities, and I consulted the staff report of a few other cities. A lot of them brought this item to the council in April to request for paid leave for staff, which I support. But then at the time, they request to provide that until April 1st, for example. I think in some cities, in March, they request to provide that in April. In April, they brought to the council again with full analysis of the cost and request to extend that to May. And then they brought it to the council again with full analysis of the impact and request it to be extended to May and then to June. This, I think, is the proper process because we did not budget this in our budget. We need to amend our budget to put this in. And we also need to understand we have budgeted, put in budget to provide a lot of services that we are not providing. So there is impact on the level of service. What exactly are their impact? We need to understand because the same amount of service or projects that we couldn't get done next year still need to get done. And we still need to pay employee to do the same amount of work that should have gotten done this year and we are paying for, but then they simply couldn't perform. It's no one's fault, but that's still a fiscal impact on the city that we need to understand. So I would like to propose, I understand the city manager has to make decision really quick under this emergency situation. And we are all learning on this process. And I hope to bring this to the council that rectify this decision so that let's do it properly. And then for any future decision, let's follow the proper process as much as we can. We can even call special meetings to get the council to approve any emergency decision like this.
Okay,
So do I have
Darcy.
a second to put this on the agenda next?
Well, if we're hearing the process right now, we should be asking questions.
Yeah, we're not doing agenda items now. Darcy, go ahead.
Okay, I have two questions. My first question is how much is in our capital projects fund right now? The staff report states that we'll be transferring an anticipated 10 million from the capital projects fund to the general fund. So how much is in the capital projects fund right now?
There's currently 16 million in unassigned fund balance, which means it hasn't been assigned to any specific project. Zach, if you're still there, I don't know if you have the total number of expenditures currently budgeted for the capital project. I just want to make sure, Darcy, I'm covering both of your questions, both at the expense side and then the amount of fund balance, which we estimate to be about $16 million.
The amended budget to date, I believe, is $43 million. I will fact check that right now.
Okay. Okay, so unassigned fund balance is different from the capital projects fund though, right?
Correct. They have their own fund balance. So that is separate from the dollars we're looking at in the general fund.
Okay, so Zach thinks that we have about 46 million or so in the capital projects fund at the moment, subject to
Really? Correct.
No.
In budgeted projects. So on the expense side, so budgeted expenditures for projects. But 16 million that's unassigned that can be used to fund future projects, or should there be shortfalls in existing projects.
I got it. Okay. So you're talking about within the capital projects fund, there's something like $16 million of unassigned money. That's an unfortunate overlap with the term unassigned fund balance, which is a completely different thing. But you're just saying the subcategory within capital projects, there's about 16 million of unassigned funds, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, my second question is this, and I think it might speak to the procedural questions that Councilmember Chow brought up. When are we going to be asked to approve this fund transfer, whether it be 10 million or something else? Because we're not being asked to do that right now. When do you anticipate coming back to us and asking for that authorization?
We will be coming back on May 19th as part of the third quarter financial report to make that recommendation to council.
That's my only other question. Thank you.
You want to go ahead, Christina?
Yes, actually, if I may, I just want to go back and cover the portion related to a budget adjustment. Again, whether a person is out like on a maternity leave or on any other leave, we budget 20/80 hours for that person. So if we were to come to make a budget adjustment, it's a net zero. We've already budgeted all of this money. It's not like we're budgeting extra money. So I just want to make that point that it'd be a non-adjustment if we came and asked for a budget adjustment. It's not moving from any account to any other account. So that doesn't necessarily make sense when we look at the kind of why we come to council.
The responsibility this person is performing is very different.
Yes, but the function
it's budgeted for, like someone is budgeted for, I had an example, building a barn. Someone is supposed to build a barn, and now they cannot build the barn. They are doing something else. After this is over, barn still needs to be built. Do we need to spend money to build the barn? We still.
You've already said
we
that.
need to reflect that change.
Yes, so
already stated that.
Is that we don't necessarily say this person is going to build a barn. We say this person is going to work 20/80 hours, and whether they do that.
No, in our budget, each item,
or 6.
Look at our budget. Each item is budgeted for a specific project, right?
So when we do it, we do overall all the positions in the city. We assume they're all going to work 20/80 hours, and then departments tell us how to split them amongst their budgets.
Okay,
but when
so let's not talk about people. So I think our budget has a lot of items and different costs for each item in the budget. And a lot of them are performed by our city employees. So in our budget, how many of these services we are not providing? That's budgeted for.
That I don't know, but again, when we look at how we budget people, so if we were to come and if council were to say, yes, come and make a budget adjustment related to staffing, I would not have an adjustment to make because the only adjustment I potentially could have to make is to say we need to reduce our salary and benefits based on where we think we're going to end the year, but it would not be an increase to the budget. And that's the only point that I'm trying to get across.
But then it should still need council approval, I think. I have one more question a resident asked. So these paid leave, the hours, do they come towards the pension, their pension hours?
Yes, so CalPERS has released a circular saying that these paid administrative leave hours would count toward their retirement. I do want to point out, though, that when CalPERS is calculating a full year of service, it's not 20/80 hours. I believe it's something like 1,700 or 1,900 hours. So most of the employees had already worked and hit that, what CalPERS considers a service year, what they use to calculate that year in terms of their salary. So CalPERS did come in and say, if they hadn't met that number, these dollars would go toward, and these hours would go toward the service credit toward their retirement.
But then in terms of level of service, my point is, if we were going to build a barn, I'm just using that as an example, it could be any services that we are providing for our residents or any project. And now that's not built. So that's an impact. on the city. So what kind of impact are there? Do I have any analysis?
Right now, we think the majority of the impacts are really related in our enterprise funds are related to Parks and Rec, and our public works departments were related to the maintenance of our facilities and grounds throughout the city. That those are really the major services that are not being performed throughout the city, and we can see that with the use of paid administrative leave, which is another reason I think, as the city manager mentioned, we're getting to a point where we can't continue to defer our maintenance on a lot of our facilities and our grounds, and that the city is considering trying to figure out a way to bring that staff back in a safe manner that complies with the shelter-in-place order, but understanding that we have essential city infrastructure that needs to be maintained.
Okay, Rod,
Thank
did you have anything?
No, I expressed myself a little earlier.
All right,
Thank you.
John, did you have anything?
Just trying to get a little better understanding. So this table, end result 900,000, reflects the cost to the city for the administrative leave. Now the question is, when this pandemic started, we saw in the news and things the suggestion that employees should be allowed to have what I believe, their same terms, paid administrative leave to help to be sick for themselves, or to attend somebody who is sick, or to provide it for somebody else. I just want to be sure that both I understand it correct, and that, again, residents that are watching, this is administrative leave that is above and beyond any thing that was in our budget. And it was not mandated by the state. It was not mandated by the county. But as a city, then the city decided this was a good thing to do, and to do it at this level.
That's correct.
Yeah. See, to me, I just want to be sure. If it was clearly put out like that and I didn't hear it, then I apologize. But we kind of went through this, and I wanted to be sure that, it's almost $1 million, of the residents' money. And so very clearly we should be making sure they understand that as a city, we have gone ahead and gotten less work from our employees because they needed to have time off for these important either health concerns or assisting people. And so then I would also say that I agree with Councilman Chow that the proper process, $1 million that was unplanned should come to the city council for two reasons. One, so that we're making what we feel is the right decision for the residents, but also the residents are actually seeing, how their money is being spent and how we're doing it, which without it coming to the city council, the numbers are just, in tables that they would never know about. So I do see that. So thank you.
So, John, I just want to point out, this is not an extra $908,415 that we have to come up with from
No,
somewhere.
it's $900,000 of work that the city did not get from their employees.
But let me make a little, can I make a little adjustment? So no decision has been made on numbers between the middle column, which is May 2nd to May 30th, nor has it been made from May 31st to June 30th. So they're not.
Good point that those ones are still on the table.
And secondly, I would say that if you take a look at what other cities do, because we are consulting all the time.
Good.
The actuals from March 17th to 4/10, April 10th, and then certainly this April 11th through May 1st. Those decisions were pretty much the same throughout the other cities. At least the very first order from 317 to 410, we were all in a rush and had put everybody, we kind of just had to respond. So you won't find actions in those two pay periods dissimilar between our
Okay,
size
yeah,
cities.
well, I'm glad that it's on the screen such that we're able to see it, and it's not, coming to us in June as something that transpired,
Right.
that we want to be, in the loop on this stuff. So thank you.
I would point out, John, that the process was exactly followed and the same, other cities had the same process.
All the decisions were made by the city managers.
The city managers make these decisions. It's not,
No, that's not true.
okay. You're not. the
Palo
other thing
Alto put
called
it on the council agenda.
Because he ran out of his authority after 30 days.
Right, okay.
All right, on to the next slide.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, you don't mute me, please.
Well, because you're
Please.
not saying accurate statements, so.
Please,
you need to
I am
be-
accurate. I read their staff report. If
Okay.
you're, please,
Okay, finish up,
if
Leon.
I didn't continue to request, to push, we wouldn't even see this table. Money would continue to be spent until undecided date. As long as Palo Alto continue to pay their employee, we will continue to. Palo Alto City Council shouldn't make decision for us. We should approve this independently, but we were not given the chance.
I certainly
Let's do
hope
it
that,
right.
I
It's a
certainly
good
hope
thing
that,
we are doing, but let's do it. Follow the process, do it right.
well, we followed the
That's all I'm
process.
asking.
We followed the process exactly, and hopefully we'll.
Show me,
continue to
please show
follow
me the proof Palo Alto didn't bring it to the
Well,
council agenda.
We are not Palo Alto, okay, thank you.
But-
Christina,
But
can you continue?
I am
Leon,
completely
please, you're
correct.
out of order. Please,
You are saying I'm
Yeah.
incorrect, but then you are wrong. That's why I have to refute.
Well,
You're
I'm sorry,
clear.
you are incorrect. Thank you. Christina, can you continue?
Yes, so that wraps up where we think we're going to end the year for the current fiscal year. Now moving forward to a preview to fiscal year 2021. I want to point out this is a preview. We will be before council on May 19th to go over a full-fledged proposed budget study session where we will dig farther into the details. So this is really more to present a high level, what are some of the things we're looking at for next year. Again, this is general fund focused. And so before we get into the numbers, I wanted to just point out some themes related to this next year's budget. The first being building on a strong fiscal strategy. So our budget book for the last 3 or 4 years has included potential strategies that council and staff could utilize should we encounter a recession. And so we already have strategies to pull from that we can use to overcome some shortages related to COVID-19 and the potential pending recession related to that. The other item is before COVID-19 even impacted the city, city budget staff, myself, the finance manager, city manager, and assistant city manager, we sat down and penciled out what a recessionary model would look like and what would be some of the strategies we think would be most prudent for the city to use. So this was something that was on our minds even prior to COVID-19 impacting the city. And so a big theme is kind of building on this, foundation or this path that we've had to remain fiscally resilient. And so you'll see that throughout the proposed budget and the proposed budget hearing, and even through some of this presentation here today. Potential service level impacts, we've already talked about this quite a bit. The reality is we let departments know probably late March or early April of some potential cuts to their expenditures or proposed budget kind of recommended asks. And they're currently trying to figure out what does that mean for a service level impact. And we anticipate coming back again at the proposed budget hearing and having a better sense of what service level impacts we think the budget might have, not only in the upcoming fiscal year, but in fiscal years down the road as well. Lastly is the approach to trying to balance this budget and the out years of our forecast is really a balanced expenditure reduction approach. And what that means is we didn't go try to grab all the money savings that we needed from one particular category. We spread the love, so to speak, and took kind of calculated cuts in each category that we thought we could reach and maintain throughout our forecast in many of the instances. So with that, I want to just take a moment to remind council and anybody who may be watching of our budget balancing strategies that currently exist in our budget book. I will tell you we did add the last item, transient occupancy tax, that hadn't been previously in here as a strategy. I just want to start by saying, as many of you probably already know, there is only one way to balance a budget. So either you're going to bring in more money or you're going to reduce your expenses. And so when we talk about budget balancing strategies, we're going to talk about both ends of the equation. When it comes to a revenue, really one of the main, only really ways the city can kind of raise more revenue is to increase the taxes. So on this slide, I won't go over too much of the detail on it, but it calls out different taxes the city has either looked at or considered putting on a ballot related to the employer-based business license tax, the quarter-cent sales tax, and the transient occupancy tax. I will tell you we're also currently looking at, on that same May 19th date or around there, bringing an item related to a potential tax measure for council to consider if they were going to put it on the ballot, and any kind of surveying around that measure. So some of these will come back to council prior to budget adoption. The other side is the expenditure side, which is related to ways that we can reduce our expenses. I won't go over all of these. I'm going to go over some high level item ones. So the 115 trust, where we have $12 million sitting there, those could be used to offset if CalPERS has some bad returns or some assumption changes that causes it to have to increase their rates to a level above where we had forecasted them. We could pull from this reserve. We could also pull from the reserve if there's some other costs that we wanted. So we could use this money to offset a full year's cost of our retirement costs, and then that would free up that money in the general fund. We'd look at salary and benefit savings through attrition, and this would mean keeping non-essential positions vacant, and these would more than likely have an impact, a service level impact, if you have less staff available to do the work. We think on average that's going to save the city about $160,000 a year. We have some cost containment strategies related to not adding any new positions, reducing our capital outlay and special projects categories in the general fund. This is not the capital. This is not the capital fund. This is just in the general fund, reducing those special projects and capital outlays. We could reduce those down, saving up to $1.5 million. We could reduce contingencies in half. That would save the city about $850,000. So as you can see, kind of across different various categories, we have different strategies that we could use to try to reduce our expense side. So now let's talk about the numbers a little bit. When we're looking at COVID-19 fiscal impacts for 2021, this table is set up very similarly to the, I think, slide number 7. I'm going to make sure I'm keeping myself honest here. Slide number 6. So it's set up very similarly, except that the 3 columns are going to be the proposed budget pre-COVID, COVID impact, and then where we think the proposed budget will end up coming before council. So again, we start with fiscal year 2021 proposed budget. We bring over that $17.5 million in estimated fund balance that we talked about in slide number 7. That was that very last column where we thought we were going to end the year. We bring that dollar over here to start this fiscal year with. Again, we're going to add our revenues. Expenditures, we're going to subtract those out. That's going to be the net impact to fund balance. And then we take that net impact and add it to that $17.5 million to get our fiscal year 2021 estimated year-end fund balance. So we originally thought we were going to be at $88.8 million in revenue. Expenditures are slightly higher than that at $89.5, which would result in us using about $0.7 million of unassigned fund balance, leaving us $16.8 million in estimated year-end unassigned fund balance in the general fund. Then we have the COVID impacts. Now we see a very large reduction in revenues related to COVID-19, bringing that number down from 88.8 to 79.5 million. Our revenues stayed the same because we haven't mitigated this revenue loss yet. And if we had kind of left our budget where we thought, where we had originally planned, and then took into account the revenue reductions to COVID-19, then we would have had only $7.5 million left in unassigned fund balance. Now we went in and attempting to mitigate these impacts, this revenue loss related to COVID. So our revenue number stays the same. We don't have any other dollars to transfer in. But what we did is we reduced expenditures down to almost lining up with our revenues, which resulted in just the use of $0.3 million in unassigned fund balance, which means that leaves us $17.2 million in unassigned fund balance that we could use to potentially balance other years. Again, if we are wrong and there's a sunnier picture on the economy, we could use those dollars, transfer them back to the capital reserve. If we wanted to, if the outlook is not so rosy and shelter in place lasts longer than June 30th, or the economy is slower to pick up than we're anticipating, or there's a second wave of COVID, or many other things happen to the economy that we're not anticipating, this $17.2 million is the first place we go to try to alleviate those changes in revenue or changes in expenditures. And so that's why for us it's important to have this level of fund balance as kind of a higher level. It's really because of the uncertainty around the economy, and we really don't know. I don't think anybody has a good guess for when the economy is going to fully open up again and what that even looks like when it's fully opened up again after the pandemic. So again, similar to what we did for fiscal year 1920, this is just a graphical representation of the table I just showed you, showing the changes to revenues, that's the gray bar, the changes to expenditures, that's that blue bar, and then the impact to fund balance based on the changes to revenue and expenditure. So when we're looking at our budget balancing strategy going into next fiscal year, there's a strong focus on trying to achieve salary and benefit savings through vacancy savings versus making a reduction in force. Right now, we're focused on trying to do that through vacancy savings. We're doing cuts across various expenditure categories. So I don't think there's any expenditure category we did not touch to make a reduction in when we were trying to balance the fiscal year 2021 budget. And again, we'll provide more of those details on May 19th as part of the proposed budget hearing. And we left our earmarked reserves untouched. That means the 115 trust and the economic uncertainty reserve. So 115 trust at 12 million, economic uncertainty reserve at 19 million, and then potentially unassigned fund balance of 17.2 million at the end of the year. And again, this is really related to all of the uncertainty in the economy. We want to have those dollars to lessen the impact to our budget, and it also buys us time. We don't have to make deep cuts as fast. It lets us ease into those and kind of in hopes that the economy will pick up again, or there'll be some changes where we don't have to get to that economic reserve or the 115 trust. I do want to make it clear though, we have those reserves there for a reason, right? For an economic downturn. So the city isn't necessarily, it's not that there isn't a desire to use those dollars, is that we have this additional buffer that we can create with unassigned fund balance that we think is really important to try to utilize given all of the uncertainty in the economy. That kind of wraps up where we the quick preview to where we think we're going to be for next fiscal year. Just as a reminder, as part of the strategic planning process for 2021, we anticipated being before council on May 19th to present the proposed budget. The yellow arrow here is where we are. So in between the adoption of the work program and the proposed budget hearing, we have this COVID-19 fiscal update. When we look at our budget cycle, we come and report to council 5 different times. The first one being related to our proposed budget. That generally happens in May. And then we're back generally in June, sorry about that, June or July.
Okay.
Sorry.
He's not happy about the budget, it sounds like. We'll be back in generally June. We have, I think, one other time in the history of me being Cupertino, did we come in July for the final budget hearing and adoption. We come again in November as part of the first quarter. You get to hear from us again in late February, early March as part of mid-year. And then we're back again at third quarter in May 19th. And these are generally the 5 times you will report to council. We're here today in this middle yellow arrow. And what we anticipate is, because there's things that are going to be changing on a pretty regular basis, that you may see more yellow arrows around this budget cycle as we get through the next fiscal year and potentially the fiscal year after. And so this is just kind of a reminder of when we would normally come talk to you. The next
I wanted to add a little something right there, Christina, go back to your cycle. So you see the fiscal year update right there for the COVID impact, because we'll probably know more, like for example, on our sales tax impact in particular. We may have another arrow probably before the first quarter. I would say sometime September, October, we might think about bringing it back here, if not earlier, but certainly at least right there before we get into November for this first quarter.
All right.
Okay, are we done with this?
Almost. I'm almost done. Okay, so just as next steps, when else you'll get to hear from us, we'll be coming, I think I said this probably 10 times during this presentation, but May 19th for the third quarter report, wrapping up fiscal year 1920. Hopefully there won't be any other changes we need to bring after that. And then we get into fiscal year 2021. We are on schedule to print the budget May 1st. And so that should be available online on May 1st. We also have the proposed budget hearing scheduled for May 19th, where we kind of go over what's in the proposed budget, the forecast, any recommendations for additional funding. That will happen on May 19th. We anticipate a CIP prioritization meeting to take place on or about June 2nd, where we kind of look at, after you've kind of seen the impacts that COVID is having on the budget and the forecast, understanding those and being able to look at our capital improvement program and seeing what projects may get moved forward or shuffled around, or any changes you want to make to the capital improvement program. And then we're back on June 16th, incorporating any changes from the May 19th hearing and the June 2nd hearing on the CIP. We incorporate those changes and bring that back to you as a final budget for adoption on June 16th. And with that, that completes my presentation. And staff and I are available for any questions you might have.
Before we go back to council, can we have Kirsten, can you have anyone that wants to speak on this item?
Yes. Mooney Matipatla has his hand raised, and Peggy Griffin.
Okay, so welcome, Mooney.
Okay, could you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Council. So my apologies, I kind of joined late. So by the way, I'm also on Bike and Pet Commission, but I'm speaking as, resident of Cupertino, so not as a commissioner. So just curious, I get the impression that we are seeing $10 million shortfall in the budget, given the COVID-19 impact, right? Instead of 89 million, our revenues are going to be 79 million, so that creates a gap. So I'm just curious as to what we are doing to close the gap, because we certainly don't want to run deficits, right? So I know the federal government as well as state government is making a lot of provisions in terms of how the funds and and how we can leverage them. I just want us to be smart to take advantage of some of those provisions. For example, employee furloughs, this, that, and all, and I don't want our city employees getting impacted, but at the same time, I want us to be smart, to leverage the funds that are available through whatever means, that we can get them. Right? So that's the point that I want to make. And second point, given the deficits we are anticipating, it's not just in our city, every city and every private enterprise is going to have the same problem. Can we look at some of the projects that we might have approved previously? Maybe time to postpone some of them, right? So maybe not the time to engage on those kind of activities. Let's be very smart about which ones we take on, which ones we defer. That's end of my comments.
Okay, who do we have next?
We have Peggy Griffin, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Okay, welcome, Peggy.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Council and staff, thank you for presenting this information. I feel good about having been raised by Depression era parents. Having a rainy day fund that's substantial is really, really important. Things can happen that you're just unexpected. I also want to Second, Lisa Warren's suggestion to provide maybe some online recreation classes that people could pay for, you know, in a Zoom environment or something that they could just sign up since we're going to be here a while. The material I've got here, some of the questions have already been answered. My recommendation on documents, the staff report doesn't have page numbers, so I suggest that any document that's presented should have page numbers so that we can reference them. That should just be standard. Under revenue questions, the sales tax, I understand, is 6 months delayed, so that's why they didn't show any changes. So I get that. Other financing sources, there's a $2.5 million loss in revenue, but it doesn't say what those financing sources were. I'd be curious to know that. Under expenditures, for non-essential employees sheltering in place, are they required to use their vacation and sick time before the administrative leave? I know that as an employee of a big company, when they shut down for Christmas, we were forced to use that or not get paid. This won't be an immediate help for the city, but it will in the next budget. Contract services, I see that you've got 1.8 million that it's been reduced, but if they could review the contracts to see if there's any more services that we're not getting. And special projects, item 3 under expenditures. I'd be curious to see the list. There's a minus $5.5 million that was reduced. Which projects got canned on the special projects and which ones still remain? And then this is just a curiosity from a resident. Number 4, transfer out under expenditures. What is that? That's $30 million. But there's no explanation for what that is. And as far as asking citizens to increase city taxes, I think that's going to be a hard sell, especially when you're paying people to not work. Anyway, but I do want to say that people are the greatest asset a company or a city can have. So you really need to balance. You don't want to lose your assets, but you also have to watch your expenses. Thank you.
Christina, what were those special projects that, this is for 2021, correct? Because we're not, you know, these are not capital projects, or are they? Christina, you there?
She's on mute.
5.15 million is from the 2019-20.
Yes, so the 5.5 million is the 2019-2020 fiscal year. Those are not capital projects. The bulk of them, $3 million of it, is related to Apple Campus 2 pass-through projects related to ancillary buildings on the campus. There's another $1 million or so related to special projects in public works that are generally kind of some facility-based projects, and the remainder are really some other small projects throughout the city. I will say that all special projects is also a place where council work program generally lives, so one-time expenses. All council work programs are staying funded, but the bulk of it is really related to Apple Campus 2 pass-through revenues, and then the another $1 million of it is related to public works facility projects.
Right. I just want to make sure we're not like stopping work on the library expansion or trails or things like that.
No. So all capital projects that have been funded and approved by City Council may remain funded and approved by City Council.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Madam City Clerk, there's no other members of the public that wish to speak?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. I do have the one email from VG.
Okay,
Okay,
you want to read that?
Wait, Peggy has some other questions. Can we respond? So she has a question, I think, regarding the, are people required to use vacation first? A bank could leave, or maybe there is a cap so that those who have accrued a lot of vacations would have to use those first.
No, that's not how it works. You're using vacation or paid time off for the other 50% or going
That's
for
my question, because
getting
different
up.
cities have this kind of policy, that there is a cap. If you stored a lot, then you should use those down to still a lot left, but then use unpaid leave, the paid leave. So we don't have any of those policy, right? Just want to clarify that.
Employees currently have the option to use paid leave or be on an unpaid status.
Right, but they're still getting their benefits, right?
That's correct.
Because
That's what the
they're
20
50%.
hours guarantees.
Right, yeah, I think that's very important. I think nobody wants to see them any employees lose their health care, that's for sure.
Because in my company used to be someone have like 200, 300 hours of vacation accrued up or even more. But if they don't use that, actually we'll have to pay them in cash.
Okay, Kirsten, can you read the email?
certainly. Dear council members, I would like to thank the city manager and staff in bringing the COVID fiscal update. The city is transferring $10 million from capital projects fund to general fund. I see that $5.5 million has been taken away from special projects and no info is provided on the projects that are impacted. It would be good if the city can provide more details on this and what projects were competing for these scarce funds. I see a cost savings of $180,000 by furloughing 80 part-time employees. This does not seem to be a large amount compared to $11 million shortfall in revenues. So I would suggest the city to take care of employees during this crisis by adjusting other line items if possible. Revenue loss of $11.3 million in one quarter is a large amount, and the city has taken steps to mitigate the deficit. I see other cities giving a COVID-19 fiscal update for FY 1920 and taking input from their council on the mitigation measures. However, I did not see this happening in our council. So I would like to know if the city of Cupertino took council inputs on mitigating measures for $11.3 million. Also, I did not see an update for fiscal year 2021. A preliminary fiscal impact on revenue shortfall should be provided to the council. To end, I would request the council members to ask clarifying questions so the public could get our education on issues. As our elected representatives, please seek information from the city on behalf of your constituents. Stay safe. Thanks, VG.
Okay, great. And I think a lot of her concerns were answered in Christina's presentation. So is there anyone else on council that wants to speak any further? John, you said you can't raise your hand, but did you have any other comments? Yes, John is not.
So I would just make kind of a minor comment. So back to slide 14.
Can we get the presentation back up?
Slide 14, the balancing strategies, expenditures. I think this helps for the two residents, both Mooney and VG, talking about, trying to mitigate the shortfalls that we're going to see. And so I'm very appreciative that Christina and her department have spent time looking for places to cut costs so that the city can stay, in a positive financial position. And so thank you for that. It would be nice to get maybe some more detail about where the one about salary benefits, it says 160,000 on average per vacancy. And so that sounded like if one employee were to retire, it would on average save 160,000, but we're not really understanding how many employees would typically be turned over during the course of a year. So a little bit more detail on those, the projects, things like that. But the mere fact that we are being proactive rather than reactive, I think is greatly appreciated. So thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, next, let's go to Rod.
Thank you. I really appreciate all the ideas about how we do this. And yeah, my only request to you is what I said earlier, that it would be really helpful to see the run rate by month. I mean, it's hard to understand all the assumptions that go into an annual number, but I think we probably can deal with what's going on a monthly run rate basis. And so that'd just be my request. I mean, if let's say that we lift this in a material way in 3 months, right? We're not going to want to live with a budget that has us doing so little all year. We're going to want to get revved up in the city. So it would just help me, I guess, to see the run rate figure. And I guess I could take it, and I could take if the numbers are really all annual, assuming that we would sustain these things, I can divide by 12, I guess. But I think it's probably a little more complicated than that. But, you know, it's either that or okay, so the assumptions on, you know, that go into what you'd really want to do. But I think we're going to have to be nimble this year. We're not going to simply say we've done the budget and, you know, it's now mid-year and we're going to do a mid-year correction. My guess is we're going to want to, you know, assess where we are at every month. And I don't mean you have to come back to us with a budget, but if circumstances materially change, I think it's going to make sense for you to come back to a council and say, okay, so, you know, here's the model we had we're locked down mode, and now here's the model we have in this new regime, which doesn't look like normal, but it may look like, you know, something in between. So thank you. I appreciate your good work here.
Okay, Darcy.
Thank you. My comment is that I would ask that we consider, instead of transferring $10 million when you come back to us on May 19th from the capital projects fund over to the general fund, is that we consider rather transferring $4.5 million instead. I think we're doing the right things with regard to projecting the budget and thinking about what our shortfall will be without mitigation. But I note that if we are going from an unassigned fund balance from our original projection of $13.1 million and increasing that by almost $4.5 million, that's not necessarily optically where we want to be. I think it makes sense to project our unassigned fund balance as being somewhat lower, not going from 13.1 all the way down to what you had it, which was $1 million or lower. But certainly, I mean, in my mind, you don't want to make it higher. And so I would say 12 sounds about right. That's about a $5.5 million difference between your 17.5 million projection. So that's my one comment. I just would like to ask for it to be considered. And I appreciate the fact that not only have staff and the finance department looked at mitigations for this current fiscal year, but for the projected upcoming fiscal year. Thanks.
Thank you. So Christina, can you comment on that, on the amount that we actually need to transfer and why it's the amount that you have on that slide?
Yeah, so the 10 million is really, I'll kind of trying to think what's a good kind of practical example to give. And the only one I'm thinking of at the moment is we're kind of like a bear preparing for winter and we don't know how long it's going to be. So the more food we can kind of take in and be prepared for, again, when we look at the pandemic, it's 10 million is our best guess. We want to leave dollars in the capital reserve, but we also want to make sure that the general fund is positioned in a way that should COVID go longer than we anticipate, which right now we're anticipating a shelter in place ending by the end of June and kind of a slow uptick in that first quarter, right? So should it go longer? Should there be a second COVID impact? Should there be something else non-COVID related that hits the economy? We just want to be able to be as prepared as we can for that. Again, as we mentioned before, having those additional fund balance, what it does is it buys us time and allows us to make more tempered cuts over the long haul versus trying to make very big, deep cuts right up front. And I think what you may notice, here's my best guess, that when budgets start to come out for other agencies around us, is you're going to see big and severe cuts happening right up front because they may not have had this level of savings built into their budget. They've historically had their revenues and expenditures be closer to each other than we have. We've had a lot of one-time revenues enter the city as well. That has kind of positioned us in a good manner to be able to take these additional dollars. So long story short, we don't know that that's the right number. This is kind of our best estimate for we think it's a good number to.
So what would be the downside of doing 5 million as the vice mayor proposed, and then if you need more, you just come back to council and say, hey, we need the other 5 million. Is there a downside to that, or is it?
There potentially could be, which is if those dollars then get allocated to a specific capital improvement project and that project has started or is underway and we need to pull those dollars back, we may lose whatever we've already put into that project. And it's also maybe a project that if we had kind of said for our CIPs, generally if they're funded, they move forward. It would be having to pull back on those projects. That's about the only downside.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councilmember Chow, you have your hand raised.
Okay, yeah. So, 3 questions. The first one is about CalPER. You mentioned as one of the mitigation measures is for CalPER. But I heard that CalPER might not perform as well as expected. So is that going to be mitigating our expense, or is that might be costing more expense?
It may be
understand that.
It may be costing more. So what happens is there's a few levers for CalPERS that impact our rates. So one of the levers is related to their assumptions about like lifespan and when people will retire. But another very big component is what they anticipate in investment earnings. So the way CalPERS is set up, the way they fund the retirement is from employee and employer contributions, and then investment returns. So if investment returns fall, generally they're going to come to employer contributions and raise our rates to recover what they need to recover. So right now in our current budget, we have the easing in of getting from the 7.5% to the 7% in the discount rate, which is the anticipated rate of return on their investments. That's what's factored in currently into our 10-year forecast. Now, if they come in and make changes to those assumptions, we generally get those in September or October for the next fiscal year. Depending on how bad the losses are related to their investments because of COVID-19, we may see large increases trying to recover those losses, or I think might have been in a meeting I was in before this, but they're talking about potentially now even lowering the discount rate further from 7 to 6.5%. All of those would have a steep impact on our expenses related to pension. And that is one of the main reasons why we set up the 115 Trust for pension, to work as a smoothing fund. So let's say we think we're going to spend $6 million in retirement for a given year, but CalPERS comes in and says that number is $8 million. We, instead of having to make big service level reductions to meet that $2 million shortfall, right? We have a few options now. We could potentially have our unassigned fund balance to pull from, or we could go to our 115 smoothing trust and go pull the $2 million out of there and pay that to CalPERS as a way to mitigate that increased expense. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. So good. So with that fund, the impact to us might be absorbed by that fund.
That's correct.
Okay, that's good to know. But then we are still expecting a expense that we need in the next fiscal year, because you were expecting about like $89 for expense, and then you would like to reduce it by $10 million to $79 million, right?
That's correct. So we want to.
Is that the kind of decision we are going to present it to us in May, where we might need to cut?
That's correct. So that'll be a portion of it will be in the proposed budget, and then a portion of it will kind of present as part of the proposed budget hearing. And some of those numbers may look different. And again, the budget is a point in time. So at a certain point in time, we need our numbers to stop moving so we can put the document together. And then there may be changes that happen after that that we'll want to incorporate. We'll bring those as part of the proposed budget hearing, but we'll walk you through where we're making those expenditure
We
reductions.
won't start that discussion until May 19th.
May 19th, or the budget book is currently on schedule. We'll let you know if anything changes to be printed on Friday. And that will be available online. If anybody's interested in some light reading of about 500 pages, that's available on Friday.
Just for a point of information, Palo Alto City Council, I just happened to find out they have started the discussion last Monday, presented ideas to the council to seek input, very rough ideas, but then they have.
Yeah, I would say, well,
for some input.
Our strategies have existed in our budget book for the last 3 or 4 years, although they may not have been formally presented to council at every budget session that we have. Those are included in our budget book, and it just might have had minor changes from what was in the budget book to what we presented this evening.
Okay, last question. Do you anticipate preparing different scenarios in your budget forecast for next year? Like, I think, sorry, I keep using Palo Alto. I just happened to read their staff report from last week. So they are looking at 3 different scenarios. One is very pessimistic, that we might be under sheltering order until the end of the year. But one might be pretty rosy, that we might recover very soon. So and then based on different scenarios, so the council direction is to bring back different scenarios so that we have not just have one point of reference.
I think currently what we'd be looking at is bringing forward what we think is the most likely plan and walking you through why we made those decisions. But I think what I've heard, at least from 2 council members this evening, is they'd really like to get a perspective on a per month basis and what those impacts might look like. And that may help build those kind of additional scenarios if council were to say,
But maybe 2 scenarios or 3, because we really don't know what's going to happen, right?
That's correct.
Month by month, we don't know. So it will be helpful to provide a range.
Yeah, and so I think that's part of kind of what we'll think about when we're building in that monthly, is to probably build in some things to say, give cutoff points. If we think here, and provide that those are going to be the differences. But overall, our forecast that we're going to present, we're going to give you the detail on one. Here's how everything is built out, and then we're going to talk about, should the shelter in place be extended? What does that look like? What are the impacts? And then in that way, be able to kind of build some scenarios for you. But in the budget, you won't see several different scenarios presented. What you'll see is one scenario that we felt was the most likely to occur. But we will bring some options when we come for the proposed budget hearing.
Great, thank you.
Okay, is there anything else? We've been going for 2 hours now.
And we have people kind of waiting for the renters assistance program. So are you proposing we take maybe a
Right, let's
5-minute break?
let's just take a few minutes and come back at like 8:40. It's 8:44 now. Let's come back at 8:49.